And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's September the 2nd, 245th day of the year. Just 120 days remain to the year's over with. And we get to start a new one. Well, holidays and observances, it's World Coconut Day. Telephone Tuesday. Kind of an unofficial transition day, when summer's last hurrah gives way to the everyday hustle. National Spalding Baseball Day. Don't forget those thrilling diamond clashes. National Blueberry Popsicle Day. Pierce Your Ears Day. National Live Fearless Day. Calendar Adjustment Day. National VJ Day, where you pay tribute to the men and women who lost their lives in World War II. Have food and drink with loved ones to remember the end of this terrible conflict. Bicentennial Day. It's a whimsical holiday, celebrated for its clever wordplay. You celebrate it with joyful shouting and humorous activities. Fiesta Divino. That's where everybody sits around and drinks Madeira wine. National Childhood Injury Prevention Week. Red Valley. Legacy Week. Yogurt Day. Literacy and Numeracy Week. Navasard. Zero Waste Week. Famous people born on this date. Keanu Reeves. Mark Harmon. Terry Bradshaw. Well, on that note, let us see what news stories are in the news, because it has been a wild weekend we're just coming off of. Well, the U.S. military has struck narco-terrorist vessels as President Trump reveals his Caribbean operation that he's got planned. During a news conference in the Oval Office today, President Trump announced the U.S. military shot out a drug boat from Venezuela in the southern Caribbean. He said, over the last few minutes, we literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat. A lot of drugs in that boat. You'll be seeing that and you'll be reading about it. Happened just moments ago. Secretary of State Marco Rubio posted on X, sharing additional details, noting that the hit was actually a lethal strike. Well, Illinois Governor Pritzker is up in arms as President Trump says, we're going into Chicago. Well, the Illinois governor and the mayor of Chicago are definitely not happy about it. They think if they just look the other way, all the problems will go away. Doesn't work that way. 14,000 migrants hoping to enter the U.S. got turned back in what's called a reverse flow phenomena. That's according to the UN. In a show called Rooftop Revolution, pastor and Project HOOD founder Corey Brooks calls out Chicago Democrats for the city's lack of safety and all the increased crime. He said the south side of Chicago is like a war zone. 2023, the city recorded 617 homicides and more than 2,000 shootings. Neighborhoods like Inglewood and Woodlawn were hit the hardest. According to Pastor Brooks, a few weeks ago he stood over the body of a man who had been shot dead. Hundreds of young souls were killed by year's end. If I'm not mistaken, over the last weekend, 53 people in Chicago were shot. That's ridiculous. Well, President Trump has unveiled a plan to move the Space Command's headquarters to Alabama. It counters Biden's order to keep it in Colorado. It's been a year-long fight over where the command should be based. While Space Command's been operating out of Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs, President Trump, during his first term, pushed for the command's headquarters to go to Huntsville, Alabama. Of course, President Biden announced in 2023 the command would remain based in Colorado because he wanted that to happen. Well, a University of Kentucky cheerleader has been accused of hiding her dead infant in a closet. She's a 21-year-old University of Kentucky cheerleader. Been arrested after allegedly hiding her dead infant. The Lexington Police Department took Laken Snelling into custody on Sunday after officers were dispatched for an unresponsive infant at a residence in the 400 block of Park Avenue earlier this last week. When the officers arrived, they located an infant that was pronounced deceased at the scene. Well, Snelling, who's the Lexington Police Department says the infant's mother, was charged with abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Well, Padres all-star reliever was carted off the field after collapsing with an apparent season-ending injury. San Diego Padres not only lost to the Baltimore Orioles on Monday, but lost one of their all-star relievers for the season. Relief pitcher Jason Adams went down in pain during the seventh inning of the team's 4-3 loss. Excuse me. At Petco Park. Well, Fannie Willis has been ordered by a Georgia court to search for Trump-related records. Georgia State Court ordered Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis to conduct a new search for records related to her criminal case against President Trump after finding that her search methods were inadequate, to say the least. This order from a Fulton County Superior Court judge stems from a months-long pursuit by the conservative watchdog Judicial Watch to obtain communications between Willis's office and the January 6th Select Committee, as well as former special counsel Jack Smith's team. They think there's a lot of collusion going on. Well, McDonald's is bringing back the extra value meal to try to lure those budget-conscious customers to come back. They've launched a promotional pricing on extra value meals for the first time since 2019. Airbnb co-founder speaks out about why he ditched the Democratic Party and voted for President Trump. His name is Joe Gebbia. Revealed why he left the Democratic Party. Cited border security concerns. He said, "This is a real problem. No reason why we shouldn't be enforcing the laws of our country and our border." And so I think as I started to pull on that thread, I sort of began to look at other topics and eventually came to the point where he didn't think he could support a political party and wants to have an open border. Well, Robin Wright, who was married to Sean Penn, admits there was a huge regret about raising kids with her ex-husband, Sean Penn. At 59 years old, she's coming to terms with her past and looking forward to the future. In a recent interview with the Times of London, the House of Cards alumni opened up about the huge regret she has as a mother to her two children and explains why she left Hollywood and found love and peace in the English countryside. She said, "I have a huge regret as a mother and experienced the fallout of this regret for many years with my kids. I wasn't hard enough on them." She's got a daughter, Dylan, 34, and a son, Hopper, 32. My guess would be Sean Penn was probably not the best role model she could have chosen. Well, Florida City Council meeting erupted over a plan to replace World War II Veterans Memorial with a government project. This was in the city of Boca Raton in Boca Raton, Florida. They were going to demolish the World War II Veterans Memorial to make way for a government campus redevelopment project. Well, the voice of the people spoke. Stop this project. People don't want it. So we'll see what happens. Well, President Trump finally addressed all those wild rumors about his health. Supposedly he died on the golf course this weekend. He said the stories about his death were greatly exaggerated. Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa has now made it official. She's not going to seek re-election next year. She said, having been raised in a family has given me so much love and support. Now as our family ages and grows, it's time for me to get back to him. She was first elected to the Senate in 2014. She's a retired Army Reserve and Iowa National Guard officer, served in the Iraq War. She's been wrestling with the decision about whether or not to run for re-election for several months. She's up for re-election in 2026. Well, Trump's Labor Day crime crackdown in D.C. netted 70 arrests, including a lot of illegal immigrants and some MS-13 members. According to a White House official, many of those arrested had prior criminal histories for assault, driving while intoxicated, and stalking, anti-stalking order violation, fraud, burglary, and peeping into a dwelling. One of those arrested on Labor Day had previously been arrested for robbery by force for assaulting a 77-year-old woman and stealing her purse. But of course, according to God's anointed who makes these decisions, she's entitled. One criminal arrest had been previously convicted for assault with a dangerous weapon and sentenced to 45 months incarceration. But the mere fact they got convicted, oh well, let's be understanding. Well, federal appeals court has given President Trump another win on the $16 billion climate fight. The federal appeals court lifts a block on grant terminations. The federal district court wrongfully blocked President Trump's administration from temporarily withholding billions of dollars in climate grants. District Court for Washington, D.C. granted an injunction blocking the Trump administration from withholding $16 billion in climate grants. And today's ruling from the D.C. Circuit Court finds the lower court overstepped its authority. Even though they were anointed by God to be a judge, that doesn't mean that they can ignore the President of the United States. Well, Miami Airport had chaos as a woman grabbed a crying child from a mother and wrapped legs around the boy to prevent an escape. It was Miami International Airport early this morning when a woman from England snatched a 4-year-old boy from his mother at a checkpoint, clung to him, and refused to let go. She kept insisting the child was hers. Alvina Amasiri Agba, 23, charged with interference with custody and 2 counts of battery. That's according to the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office. She allegedly approached a mother standing at a checkpoint at the Miami International Airport offering to help soothe her crying 4-year-old son. And after picking up the child, she walked out of the line and away from the child's mother. So the mother followed and asked her to give the child back, and she said, "No, this is my child." Well, a UK comedy writer, Graham Lenham, arrested over social media posts criticizing a trans activist. In England, you can be arrested for what you think, not just for what you do. Well, at the Burning Man Festival, a homicide rocked the festival as police asked for public help. A man was found lying in a pool of blood. The homicide occurred August 30th between 8 and 9:30 p.m. local time. That's according to the Pershing County Sheriff's Office. The Labor Day weekend event drew tens of thousands of burners who were participants working to build an entire city from the ground up in Nevada's Black Rock Desert. Authorities believe festival goers could provide the new information leading to the identification of the victim. Well, Grand Ole Opry's 100-year legacy brought to compelling life in what's called Meet the American. Fox Nation's Meet the Americans returned for season 2 with America's Newsroom co-anchor Bill Hemmer, showcasing stories that are part of what makes America great. Each episode highlights individuals whose ideas and perseverance and innovations left an enduring imprint on American culture. With a full episode of the new season spotlighting the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. The story was about George Hay, who's credited with founding the musical treasure. And let me tell you this about that. It's not a good Opry if it doesn't have banjos. Well, President Trump is surprised Israel no longer has total control over Congress, warned the Gaza war was hurting global support. The Israel support in Congress and around the world has declined in recent years. During an interview with the Daily Caller, President Trump said because of the left-wing U.S. politicians rallying against Israel and the growing unpopularity of its war with Gaza, they're losing influence. They need to end it. Well, Cracker Barrel is hitting back at self-interested Steak and Shake CEO's poor leadership after a barrage of online attacks. Restaurant chain calls CEO Sardar Begai's leadership a cautionary tale following relentless online attacks. Now, Cracker Barrel fired back at all the rumors and innuendos after his fast food chain criticized the restaurant's rebrand on social media. The one thing to keep in mind, as was said by the man that founded it, who I got a chance to meet almost 60 years ago, Cracker Barrel takes you back to what used to be. Well, a top tennis star, Arna Sabalenka, says tequila makes her feel great, though experts say it's not a hangover elixir. She takes a drink of tequila and whatever she had the night before doesn't bother her anymore. But health experts say to take that not with a squeeze of lime, but with a grain of salt. She's the world's number one ranked women's tennis player and reigning U.S. Open champion. Recently told Airmail magazine tequila is much better on the body. She's a brand ambassador for Maestro Dobel, the official tequila sponsor of the U.S. Open. Says she prefers Reposada tequila, which is barrel-aged and known for its smooth, mellow flavor. Well, a red state is arguing about trans bathroom, and that case is going to be the death knell for the left-wing agenda. It's South Carolina. Their Attorney General, Alan Wilson, believes it's going to be the death knell. This legal fight is raging over public school bathrooms and transgender students. It's now gone to the Supreme Court. South Carolina asked the Supreme Court to pause a federal appeals court order granting one transgender high school student access to boys' bathrooms. That's a move the state says clashes with the law requiring facilities to be based on biological sex and comes just months after the court upheld Tennessee's ban on gender treatment for minors. Well, Snoop Dogg's rep says comment on Instagram addressing his criticism of LGBTQ characters in films is fake. That comment made it appear he was a very anti-LGBTQ characters. That comment appeared on a Hollywood Unlocked Instagram post, according to The Hollywood Reporter. That outlet noted the post seemed to come from Snoop's official account. He said, I was just caught off guard and had no answer for his grandsons when they went to see the film and they asked questions. He said, all my gay friends know what's up. They've been calling me with love. My bad for not knowing the answers for a 6-year-old. Both Deadline and Hollywood Reporter reported that a representative for Snoop said the comment was fake and didn't come from anybody on his team. Well, ex-mayor de Blasio is touting socialist Mamdani as New York City's answer to Trump policies. I mean, having spent several years in New York City, I can, in my humble opinion, de Blasio's about a sandwich short of a picnic. But he's endorsed Democratic Socialist Zoran Mamdani for mayor. Did it yesterday. Did it this morning. Pending his endorsement, an opinion piece for the New York Daily News, the former mayor highlighted Mamdani's commitment to affordability for working-class New Yorkers. Well, A 63-year-old Illinois man's death has now been deemed a homicide, according to the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. He was drowned. Chicago Fire Department recovered the body of an unidentified adult male from the water on Saturday. The police department said the incident is now being investigated as a homicide. They said on ABC 7, most people referred to the deceased as Captain Bill. Noted the man had done charters pretty much every day during the summer. Always had a smile on his face. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Well, Pope Leo has signaled a continuation of Pope Francis's welcoming of the LGBT community in the Catholic Church. That's according to a Jesuit priest and proponent of a more inclusive Catholic Church who met with the Pope this week. Father James Martin told the Associated Press, "I heard the same message from Pope Leo that I heard from Pope Francis, which is the desire to welcome all people, including LGBTQ people, into the Church." Well, the Powerball jackpot hit a new major milestone after no winning numbers were drawn. It's now $1.3 billion, the fifth largest jackpot in games history. Estimated cash value is $589 million after no ticket matched all the numbers on Monday. There's another drawing tonight, and should I win that, you won't hear this show anymore. I'll have a new show. Well, a woman who has admitted to threatening to kill President Trump has been released. She was arrested last month for allegedly making death threats against the president, released by a federal judge who has clashed with the Trump administration several times this year. That's Chief Judge James Boasberg, who basically has the position if Trump's for it, he's against it. Well, we've got a major automaker hit by a cyber attack. Says the incident severely disrupted operations. That's the Jaguar Land Rover. Joins a string of major corporations hit by cyber attacks. You'd think if they got the knowledge and the ability to hack a major corporation, they could find something to make money with that. Well, Ilhan Omar claims to be barely getting by, but she's now worth $30 million. That's after claiming she's not a millionaire. Well, she's actually right. She's a multimillionaire. Well, Greta Thunberg is causing waves again. She's taking a flotilla of ships to Gaza. Israel said she'd never be unloading anything on the Gaza beaches. And a number of radical anti-Israel activists are now joining with the squad, who are, for the most part, anti-Israel. Well, Charlie Sheen, fear of fading stardom, fueled a spiral of drugs and booze and chaos. He says now he's closed the door on all that. He's going to concentrate on his kids. He's giving up a life of hard partying, and at least according to what he said in a new interview. Well, an 8-year-old boy was snorkeling in the Florida Keys when he was bitten by a shark. Unfortunately, there's no additional information available about the condition of this young man. Well, then a Chicago man with a felony record has been charged in connection with an August 10th train station attack that left a 9-year-old boy dead, was released from jail Monday while he waits trial. Michael Carosa, 52, been charged with felony involuntary manslaughter after Elijah Flores died during an attempted robbery gone wrong. Yes, our God's anointed has decided that we must be understanding and merciful. Well, Danica Patrick has survived Burning Man after bad weather wiped out the popular attraction. That and finding a dead body certainly didn't help. Well, according to Treasury Secretary Bessent, President Trump is weighing the national housing emergency. He said the Trump administration may consider tariff exemptions for construction materials. Several states have emergencies. Well, Kate Middleton, it turns out, was told by Prince Philip, "You're not a celebrity, you represent the monarchy. So basically, don't get the big head." Well, a West Point football player, Larry Pickett Jr., rescued a man from a burning car in New York. My screen keeps shutting down. That's not good. He's a second-year cadet at the military academy at West Point and a safety for the Army Black Knights football team. Was spending the weekend with his family following Friday night's game against Charleston State. Well, on that note, that's all the news we've got to talk about. Now, of course, if something earth-shaking pops up, I'll be back to continue the news. But for right now, we're going to talk about UFOs, which is one of my favorite topics. The interesting thing, there's been a lot of encounters with UFOs that really haven't made the headlines. For example, one of my favorite that I've talked about before was a Brazilian farmer, Antonio Villas-Boas. Because of the heat in South America, he did his farming at night, and a UFO came down, and before he could escape on his tractor, he was grabbed and taken on board a UFO, where he was stripped and rubbed down with some kind of liquid, and then he was paired off with a female alien for a night of excitement. And until he died, and this happened back in 1957, he swore he was telling the truth. Now, in 1977, in Wales, a group of school children reported seeing a cigar-shaped spacecraft and a figure in silver getting out of it. The Ministry of Defense. Now, of course, Wales is part of England, or the British Empire. And this was in Broadhaven. And if there was any resolution, it was never brought to light. Then we've got Ilkley Moore, 1987. Retired police officer claims that there was an abduction, and he actually took a photograph during his morning walk. He claimed he was abducted by aliens and actually produced a blurry photo showing an alien figure. Then in Italy, we've got the Zanfretta UFO encounters. There was a series of alleged UFO abductions that took place in Italy between 1978 and 1981. Involved a night watchman who had multiple encounters with aliens. Pierre Fortunato Zanfretta reported being abducted 11 times. I wonder if he got the same kind of reception that Antonio Villas-Boas did. Well then, from Italy, let's go to Spain. The Manises UFO incident. It involved a TAE Super Caravelle and a Mirage F1 who tried to intercept the red lights that appeared on the verge of colliding with the commercial flight. But they outran the F1, and that takes some speed to do that. And then, of course, 1982 to 86 in the Hudson Valley, the over 5,000 people report seeing V-shaped UFOs with multicolored lights. Now, you never know what you're going to see, especially if you're in areas that tend to have a high degree of weirdness, shall we say. Well, from the Hudson Valley, let's go to the Mojave Desert. There's a lot of very strange stories that have come from there. You know, as I was growing up, there were always several types of ghost stories floating around. That's one reason I've written so many books about ghosts, and for over 20 years here did ghost tours. You know, the most popular of these type of stories usually center on somebody driving in the middle of nowhere and picked up a lone hitchhiker who would after prove to be a ghost. Common theme was that they'd been the victim of a murder or a horrible accident, now haunted that stretch of road where it happened. The one that I heard most often, man stopped to pick up a very attractive young lady on the side of the road and asked her where she was going to go, and she told him, and he drove her there, and when he pulled up out in front of the house where she wanted to go, he turned to talk to her, and she was gone. So he went up to the door and knocked, and he explained the situation, and the woman had lived in the house, said, well, that was her daughter who had died about the location where he had picked her up. And a number of people had told him that she asked him to take her there. She said, hopefully one day somebody will bring her all the way to the door. Well, you know, in the Mojave, there's also a unique version of this type of repeating ghostly intervention. It doesn't usually involve roads or transport, almost always centered around haunted mines. And in the desert, there are literally thousands of old and abandoned mines, and a lot of them have stories of ghosts and spirits related to them. Well, the vast lonely desert was and still is a mecca for people seeking mineral riches, and a lot of folks have perished there, quite often violently, through accident or ill fortune or outright criminal treachery in their attempt to gain a fabulous fortune. You could write a Bible-sized book with stories of haunted mines, but they all pretty much seem to follow the same formula as the hitchhiking ghost stories. One that I found fascinating involved a young worker who was killed at the Virginia Dale mine down in the appropriately named Dale Mining District near 29 Palms, California. The area was a booming mining hub in the late 1800s up until the early 1900s, when it was pretty much abandoned and deserted. A lot of mines and shafts still exist among the rugged hills, and they draw hundreds of desert rats and explorers every year who enjoy wandering the rugged area and looking at the old diggings and the ruins. And to say that the Virginia Dale mine is to give the impression of one great tunnel in the earth with men working like ants around the clock to try to get that goal, that'd be a mistake. Often it was a series of small shafts or excavations that were claimed and worked by a company of miners being grouped together under a single name for ease and legal registering purposes. So the story I'm going to relate didn't begin at the Virginia Dale proper, but at one of the smaller shafts known as the Oak Mine. February 21st, 1900, Los Angeles Herald carried a small article, and it said that a certain Riley Myers was killed in the cave-in when the tunnel he was shoring up collapsed and crushed him. He was working alone, and when found, the unfortunate guy was discovered pinned against a wall by tons of rock with his head and upper torso horribly mangled. Body being retrieved by his poor wife and brother, the young miner was then laid to rest miles away from the scene of the accident back near Los Angeles. Now, most of the mines down in the Dale District have been sold and resold over the years, and so finding the exact location of any particular shaft is difficult because they've all been renamed by their subsequent owners. So often one mine actually has several titles. The Virginia Dale mine site proper is still identifiable, but the exact shaft that was deemed the Oak Mine is still debatable. And you might ask yourself why this would matter, but you still like to, when you visit these places, know exactly where any particular shaft you might be looking for might be located. There's a number of off-roaders and motocross bikers who use that area on the weekends. And, of course, it's right near the 29 Palm Marine Base. And it's from those off-road folks and motocross bikers that the story of the ghost of Riley Myers had its beginning. Now, there was a gentleman named Jason who was an avid off-roader and amateur paranormal investigator. His passion was EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. To avoid a lengthy explanation, suffice it to say it involves using sound recording equipment to obtain evidence of ghostly voices or sounds in supposedly haunted spots. I've known a number of people who have recorded EVPs on some of the ghost tours that I did. Now, some people swear they can also record angels and demons and other ecto spirits using complex and highly sensitive gear, but maybe yes, maybe no. But for right now, we're going to talk about leaving a small battery sound recorder in a spot to try and pick up any weird or strange sound. That's what Jason and his friends like to do. The story had been going around in his writing group that some of them had encountered a ghostly figure near the Virginia Dale mine, usually late at night, and then only got a fleeting glance. They said it looked like a guy in old work clothes with his head and upper body soaked in blood and one arm dangling by his side. Almost the exact same injuries reported have happened to Riley Myers back in 1900. He'd be seen standing at the entrance to one of the open shafts. Upon being sighted, would turn and flee into one of the open tunnels and disappear. And some folks said they had stopped to see if it was somebody who truly needed assistance, but could never find him or coax anybody to answer from deep in the shafts. Bit of a local folklore, and no one really took the story seriously until Jason decided to do some EVP recording down in a couple of the shafts and came back with something very interesting. Camping nearby one night in December 2008, he and a girlfriend powered up their small Sony recorder and put it deep within one of the smaller shafts, just at the place where the tunnel ended due to falling rock and shattered timbers. He left it sitting on a discarded timber, and they turned it to record and went back to their campsite for the rest of the night. In the morning, they retrieved the device, and after a day of riding and having fun in the Dale District, they went home to listen to the recording at length. Jason said he first gave it a quick check at the site with some cheap earbuds, but as the recording was almost 4 hours in length, didn't really get a good chance to examine it until he got back home. There he put it on while playing his Game Boy, just working on his motorcycle. And when he related his story, he said he'd been listening for like an hour or so, and mostly just silent or maybe the distant sound of wind blowing across one of the vents or openings. Pretty common with most mine recordings. And then he heard what sounded like a grumble or a croak, like somebody imitating a bullfrog. That's the best he could describe it. Just kind of a low grunt. Then it got a little louder and sounded like whatever it was came right up to the recorder. little bit of static as well. At one point, whatever it was moved or bumped the recorder because it thumped and made a plastic sound. And then for about 30 seconds, it sounded like somebody talking or mumbling real low and deep down in their chest. Now, often people who like to practice this stuff say you have to slow the recording way down to hear some of the alleged sounds and the voices, and sometimes even reverse the sound to make sense of it. And that's what Jason did on his computer on this particular occasion. He said, I had it on the scope so I could see the exact sounds I wanted to slow and play, and my software lets me do it real easy. At just the point where the thing sounds closest to the Sony, he distinctly heard it say the same thing several times. You have to listen really close because you turn up the level, the hiss comes way up loud as well. But you can hear a voice say, help me, or maybe help it. I mean, it's a man's voice, and it's definitely there. Everyone he's played it for gets real quiet when they hear it. It's actually quite spooky. Well, there's some disagreement about what the words are that Jason swears he hears. One individual says it's like some deep grumbling or exhalation repeated several times, and since you can definitely hear something bump the recorder, you can't help but wonder if it might not be some curious animal or a bird in the mine checking out something new in its nocturnal environment. Anybody who spent any time around old mines can tell you that oftentimes various animals make use of a cool shaft to stay out of the searing desert sun, or maybe bring its food back to the mine in order to eat in peace and security. And not to mention the millions of bats that roost in these old mines and shafts, skittering to and fro all night long. But getting back to Riley Myers, the repeated sighting of this spectral figure with wounds matching his, along with it being in the exact historical location of his demise, and some people saying they can hear a plea for help, does make it a mystery worth discussing. One thing to keep in mind, the article in the 1900s newspaper says he was crushed badly and killed instantly by the fall of many tons of rock. So there wouldn't have been much time for him to utter a cry for help. And the body was removed by relatives and buried someplace else. So why would his ghost hang around such a remote and forlorn place and still plead for assistance? Maybe it seeks solace for dying in such a lonely fashion, or seeks to draw some unsuspecting soul to their own doom further in the age digging. But the timbers are now completely dried and rotten, and the tons of rock above are loose and unsteady. So the next time you feel like wandering into one of these abandoned shafts, keep that in mind. Now, the next story I'm going to relate about is many miles to the north of the Dale Mining District, up in what's known as the Mojave National Preserve, just past the old town of Cima. That's C-I-M-A, don't you know? It's got a lot of haunted cabins and outbuildings. Strangely enough, it's named the Death Valley Mine, despite the fact that it isn't even in Death Valley. Fairly well-preserved collection of buildings, old equipment, and poorly fenced shafts. Was established in 1906 when the mine sporadically produced gold until the 1930s. Pretty much abandoned before being reopened for a while in the 1950s. And while the present rusty, ruined equipment lying about dates from that time period, there's no question that it gave enough paying color, so to speak, to make it worth hauling in that equipment. Now, caretakers lived on the property from the 50s through the 70s, and it's from them that the tales of hauntings and paranormal activity come. Main building still standing. Looks like it might have been an office, much larger than some of the smaller cabins that dot the site, and for some reason it seems to attract the bulk of ghostly visitations. Maybe the ghost of the former miner has still come seeking the pay and compensation they still feel they're entitled to. And they'd have earned it, working out in that heat and in dangerous conditions that you would have encountered underground. In fact, caretakers in the 1970s have ventured down into one of the collapsed shafts, found the remains of hundreds of birds and small animals that had crawled down seeking relief from the oppressive heat and drawn to the moisture below before finding themselves trapped with no way to crawl back out. Numerous skeletons litter the ground to this day and are certainly joined by many more unfortunate since that time. But you have to ask yourself what kind of haunting or visitations were recorded at a site like this. First story is from an elderly gentleman who works as a caretaker back in the late 50s, and so even then the main building, which was still somewhat in use at the time, was haunted. According to him, and the stories are related to his friends, that place had ghosts and was haunted, with the large building being where most of the action took place. Now, there's another story that's much more detailed and certainly falls under the category of strange. A photographer by the name of Mark from Milwaukee specializes in picture essays of travels around the American Southwest. On one trip, he was featuring old post offices in remote places, and he happened to be up in the Mojave doing a shoot at the old post office in Chima, which is now a ghost town. Though actually calling it a town would be unusually generous. Well, like a few buildings crumbling away and some rusty junk heap up alongside the railroad line. But anyway, he heard the story about the old Death Valley mine and decided he was going to head up there and check it out. He said he was going to shoot some of the old cabins at the magic hour, which is generally defined as sundown when the sunlight is very evocative. And then he was going to head on up to Vegas for the night. When he got to the mine, there was so much cool stuff to see and shoot that he ended up pretty much occupied till it was dark. Ended up using a flash to get some great shots of the screech owls that inhabited the place. They'd sit there staring down at him from the old rafters and some of the decayed buildings, and he said he got some pretty amazing shots. He's come out of the last little cabin at the edge of the place and looked up past the main building to where he'd parked his car, and it was dark enough he had to wait a few minutes for his eyes to adjust to the night after using his flash. While he was standing there, he thought he saw a flashlight or a light being turned on in the big building, except it looked rather purplish, not like a regular white light. For a second, he thought somebody else might be there as well, but when he looked where his car was parked, he couldn't see any other vehicles. And he knew there was no power in the place. He'd been in that building earlier, and aside from a dodgy floor, it was rotten. In fact, he was afraid he was going to fall through. There wasn't much inside, apart from some old cabinets and empty shelves. So he knew it couldn't be a night light or security light coming on. Besides, the place was completely abandoned, or at least looked it. Couldn't see any footprints in the dirt alongside some of the lanes that lead to the empty cabins where he'd been walking around. Well, going up toward the building on his way to his car, he looked at the open doorway as he passed by, and he said there was something or somebody sitting on the porch of that big building. At first, he thought it was a person being perfectly still and watching him, but as he got closer and moved along the railing on 4 feet, and could see it looked like either a big black dog or a wolf. Well, he knew there weren't any wolves up there, but the thing was way bigger than a coyote, and the only thing you could think of was a dog. And you might think, well, so what? It's a dog. But you should know that roaming packs of wild or feral dogs out in the West have been responsible for some pretty nasty attacks resulting in people and pets getting badly mauled. So he stood real still and watched it silently go around the corner of the building and disappear from sight. And not seeing it again, he kept on going to his car, and after throwing his bag and gear in the back, he got ready to leave, except the car wouldn't start. Brand new rental, and it's totally dead. Wouldn't turn over, just click, click, click. Well, he was no mechanic, and he didn't have cell service, so he decided to just spend the night in the car and then walk down to the road a few miles in the morning and try to call somebody. Had a few bars signal when he was making the trip up from SEMA, so he figured he might be able to get some help. And he made sure to always carry a list of all local garages or ranger stations in the area that he visits, so he wants to make sure he's not ever totally stranded. Well, he'd spent plenty of nights in the car while doing these shoots, so putting the seat back and trying to get some sleep wasn't a big deal. Wasn't all that comfortable, but it was doable. I also figured he could at least get some sun-up shots, which might make for a better article. And that's what he did. Got in and dozed off. And woke up and dozed off again. Actually slept for a couple of hours. Had the window cracked a bit on the passenger side, so it was still pretty warm out, and was laid back about 45-degree angle when he heard something. Well, at least he thought he heard something. He was kind of half asleep and had his eyes closed when he heard something growl or grunt against the opposite door. Opened his eyes and looked over. Didn't see anything till he turned his head back and looked straight ahead. And there was that big black dog thing again, standing in the middle of the path that led from the parking area to the mine buildings. He said it was dark, but he could see its outline against the lighter ground, just sort of standing there looking straight at him, or at least right in front of the car, like it knew he was sitting there staring back. Just about to try and turn on the headlights to see it better when suddenly, from the large main building off behind it, there was another quick purplish flash of light like he'd seen earlier, like somebody turning the lights on and off real quick. Instantly, the big dog turned and looked at the building of the flash, and the dog ran straight to the building and ran up the steps. It was like somebody was calling the dog to come back. But he didn't see or hear anything, just a couple of flashes of light. Well, he wasn't too scared at first when he saw the dog again, as he felt rather safe locked in the car, but seeing that light, he suddenly thought there might be somebody in the old building, and what if they had a gun or something? At that point in time, he got pretty scared sitting in the car. He actually felt trapped. What if somebody came out? He didn't know what he was going to do. Well, he waited and watched, but didn't see anything else the rest of the night. Didn't get much sleep, obviously, and when dawn came, he contemplated getting out and walking back down the long road to try and make a call, but he's now worried if the dog was still out there, it may come after him. So after a little bit, he got up the courage to open the door and get out. He also had to take a leak. Just about to open the door, and for some reason he decided to turn the key again and see what might happen. Well, lo and behold, the engine started right up. I mean, he had tried and tried all evening and couldn't get anything. Now it started like it didn't have a problem. Well, he was, of course, extremely happy about that, but he still had to take a leak, so left the engine running and opened the door and got out. And as he said, he did the deed, all the while keeping an eye out on the big building in case the dog came out. But he never saw it, and with the door open and engine running, he decided to walk a few yards to the start of the trail where they'd seen the thing standing, see if there were any tracks, and of course he didn't find anything. In the dust, he could clearly see his boot tracks, but no dog tracks. Well, he thought it was getting pretty weird at this point, and he decided he was going to pass on those morning shots. Wasn't going to risk turning the engine off again and possibly running into the dog, so he got back in the car and drove off. Got back down to Seaman. After a quick stop, headed out to the highway. Well, part of him has always wished he'd gone over to the old office building and looked inside to see what could have been made those purple flashlights. But the other part of him knows that it would have been really stupid, especially if there was a huge wild dog hanging around the place. After some of the stories he'd heard about people seeing things, wondered if he might have encountered something paranormal. But he never heard of a ghost having a dog, but, you know, there's all kinds of stories out there. But in ghost lore, there is a story of a black dog, a huge hound, that sometimes haunts an area whose sighting is a harbinger of death. But no one's ever said if they have ghostly masters. I mean, in this particular case, since the dog ran back into the building, it's implied, but from all reports, Mark is still in good health today. Now, in regard to the purple flashes he saw, that phenomenon has been reported a number of times, especially in connection with old mines and cabins. A lot of folks reported seeing orbs or small floating balls of light or energy in these remote and lonely places, which usually appear after sundown and often at times seem to react or interact with the person observing them. I know when we used to go to Concordia Cemetery for our ghost tours, we quite often saw orbs. Some folks reported feeling the presence of something dark malevolent when encountering these orbs, and others have expressed just the opposite. The orbs seem to be alive and almost playful, like fireflies on a nightly romp. Could they be spirits of the dead or some other life form? Or as some physicists have postulated, spontaneous bursts of electromagnetic energy or plasma generated by geological pressure deep underground due to plate tectonics? Well, no one's ever figured it out for sure, though I'm aware of many stories of this type. Now, up in Death Valley National Park, just past the racetrack, a flat area famous for its mysterious moving rocks, if you travel down a long dirt trail named Lost Burrow Mine, you'll come to, with no surprise, the Lost Burrow Mine. It's a fantastic old mining camp that offers the visitor an awesome collection of buildings and numerous shafts and tons of rusted equipment. And a huge mill that's still standing. It's actually a photographer's dream. The place is set on the slopes of a richly colored mountain that just screams mineral wealth. And the story of the mine's founding is equally colorful. According to the story, in 1907, a man chasing after an escaped pack burro decided he'd had enough of running through the boulders and heat and following that ornery beast, and gave vent to his pent-up anger, reached down and picked up a rock to throw it at the escapee, but he noticed the rock seemed rather heavy for its size. And being a prospector, broke it open and found it contained a sizable assortment of gold nuggets. Soon there was a sizable operation humming away on the spot, which promised vast riches for everybody involved, but as with many of these outfits, various problems and calamities plagued the various companies that tried to capitalize on the venture. Gold was brought out, but after a bountiful run of several decades, the mine fell silent and eventually was abandoned. Today it's a favorite spot for 4x4 enthusiasts and off-road adventurers. And there have also been a number of reports of orbs. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. And one reason this, hopefully this show sounds better, I just got some new equipment. I would appreciate knowing what you think about the new sound. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for The Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.